So for our very first panel for today, I want to bring on Stani and Rune to talk about the future of stablecoins. So please join me in welcoming both Rune and Stani on stage. GM.
Okay. Hello.
All right. So I mostly want to spend the next 30 so minutes understanding how everybody else should think about stablecoins, and more specifically, how you think about this entire space evolving. I'll kind of start my first question with you, Rune. Tell us about where you see Maker fitting in now. It's been the first stablecoin out there. You've been growing and evolving and changing for so many years. What's the new direction and the future of MakerDAO?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I want to say is any stablecoin needs to focus on growing user demand. And this is actually sort of, there's a lot of stablecoin projects out there. Even a project like Maker has had a very hard time sort of struggling to understand this is actually what matters, not all sorts of other things. I mean, there are many other things that are great features or whatever, great stuff that a stablecoin can do, but you got to figure out how to get users to your stablecoin. And as we sort of, realized this is the only thing that really matters, this is what you got to figure out. They become clear that what you can actually measure and tell that users want sort of on the ground, usually something like, I want a currency that other people are using already, right? And where I'm going with this is that, and actually this is something I kept getting told coming to Turkey, right? That if you're stablecoin and you are thinking about what's your place in the market, what are you offering your users, you basically have to think in terms of Tether, basically, because Tether is like the actual dominant stablecoin that already today is sort of has a real product market fit at an extremely large scale, right? That people use as money in this like ideal financial inclusion kind of way. So I think in the past, Maker's always just viewed ourselves as like, well, we're just a better version of Tether or something like that. We're sort of competing directly, and we're just trying to get people to use it as money. But again, you can't really do that if you're fighting against a much larger network effect, right? So our conclusion is basically you've got to find something in addition to this like core, you're just trying to be money and that's it, the best money or something like that, right? And so in our case, what we think is really the second sort of big opportunity and the second big business model you can go for in crypto is yield, right? So we've already started with that in Maker with the DAI savings rate and SDAI, right? Where people can get a 5% yield if they're not Americans. And that's been really successful, right? In growing. I mean, that's actually managed to like be the first major sort of growth spurt in a sense after this massive downturn, where we had a moment where Maker accumulated demand or something like 1.5 billion due to this new yield that was available. And you have a lot of projects building on top of this as like a new primitive, because now there's like it's not like the old days in DeFi summer, but the big difference is it's more reliable and sustainable, right? You can actually count on this yield, and that is also by itself interesting because it allows you to build more lasting and use cases. But we want to go further than just providing an efficient yield on chain that's powered by real world assets and sustainable collateral that can deliver this yield. We want to see if we can tap into the unique power of crypto and deliver something that's a little bit more exciting and fun and gamified, specifically sort of tying back to DeFi summer, right? The spirits of getting together communities out of thin air, in a sense, through yield farming. So that's really the core of our strategy with what we call Endgame, which is this attempt to like do a sort of final overhaul of Maker that sets it up for long-term lasting growth through tapping into all the absolute best things, the most powerful things that have been discovered to be possible with crypto.
Awesome. We're going to dig into Endgame in a second. I'll kind of ask a similar version of this to Stani. Obviously, we've seen Tether immensely grow in parts of the world. And over the last few years, USDC as well. Maker obviously has been around for a little bit over 5 I'm not mistaken. Why start Grow? Why did the Aave ecosystem need Grow? What made you kind of think about this being the next step for the space?
Yeah, it's quite interesting because in the Aave ecosystem, essentially what Aave protocol is, you can supply cryptographic assets, and then you can earn yield and draw other cryptographic assets, stablecoins, for example, and borrow against your collateral. So this whole collateralization is a really powerful feature in decentralized finance. Not just the Aave protocol, but the DAI MakerDAO system is based on over-collateralization to quite good extent. And the perspective we came with Go is that when we build products at our company, we try to understand what the users want, right? So what kind of products we can actually build, or features, or anything that makes their lives easier. And something that we notice is that, especially like during the DeFi summer and a little bit later as well, that the protocol itself had liquidity crunches. So obviously the interest rates in the Aave protocol are algorithmic, meaning that they're based on supply and demand. So at some point there is a shortage of stablecoins, and that causes issues for the user itself, because you come to Aave because it's simply a really good product. And, I constantly see a lot of interesting lending protocols being launched, or higher yield. And people always kind of like wonder, like, why aren't the Aave users moving their funds elsewhere? But I think like the product is kind of the stickiness that we have. So we were thinking that, how we can actually improve their behavior on the protocol through the app. And we realized that, if we can guarantee liquidity for these users at predictable prices, effectively the borrow rate, we can actually create happier users. And that's how we think about. We do have a large community. So obviously the Aave protocol itself is governed by the Aave DAO. There is like a brilliant contributors that are contributing direct to the protocol, whether it's development or something else. And I do think that it's a really powerful mechanism for our users, and that's where the plan of Go came. So
one thing kind of I noticed from both of your answers is that in a way we're focusing on a subset of what the audience is for these stablecoins. So my kind of first question to you is, to both or either of you, yield is definitely very powerful, but is that the profile of the person who should be using the stablecoin, or minting it to increase the supply? How do you actually measure the success of the stablecoin? Is it the flow? Is it just the issuance? What's the key metric here? And like kind of, are we betting on payments being the end game for a working stablecoin, or something else?
Yeah, this is my favorite thing to discuss about stablecoins, because there's such a, I don't know what it is, but in the whole crypto industry, there's like a really strong misconception and confusion about this fundamental thing, like what matters for a stablecoin. And I mean, I was actually pretty much saying it before, right? But in terms of what, it doesn't matter where the supply comes from. It doesn't matter like any of these other things if people aren't holding the damn thing. If people don't want to hold a stablecoin, then all the other stuff is pointless. And it's always going to be the key KPI. Like the fundamental key metric is how large is the supply of the stablecoin. And the only thing that can possibly drive that, barring some edge cases, is how much demand is there for the stablecoin, right? How many people want to, hold the stablecoin in their pocket and use it as savings, and consider it, and this is kind of the tricky part, consider it a stable store value. Because that's kind of the real problem, is it's just like, I mean, we're not talking about the core like crypto community of like people coming to an event like this, for instance. Like, I mean, obviously there's a lot of users and there's a lot of money. And probably many of you are like ETH ICO investors or something, right? But the reality is like the real scale of a stablecoin like DAI, and especially something like Tether, it comes from like much more ordinary, normie types of people, right? And it's very, very hard to like convince them to trust something that's built, that's backed by like some techno stuff that is complicated, and and they're not necessarily into decentralization or any of this stuff. They're
Well,
into
do they even need to know this, right? That's the
No.
other piece.
Yeah, and I mean their favorite thing is Tether, right? And it's totally not centralized, but they love it because they can trust it.
Not just Tether, but Tether on Tron network. So it's it's like double bad.
We actually looked into this because we were like, let's figure out what's going on with Tether and Tron. And actually, supposedly, it really is that normies, they do only hold Tether on like Binance and fintechs. The Tron stuff, that's all these fintechs and Binance transferring between each other. So I wish there would be a lot of normies out there using Tron wallets, but so far, based on what we know, that is not the case. Would be fun though.
So maybe you want to add something to it, like how do we kind of ensure there's more payments via stablecoins for our regular day-to-day things, and is that what we're betting on with Go?
Yeah, the larger vision is that a lot of stablecoin projects they focus on the supply side in the beginning. So, what's the technology behind of the collateralization? What are the features of the whole system, and how you can actually grow within the decentralized finance ecosystem? And obviously, Go has been launched a few months ago. It's now roughly 35 million, so it's very small, but quite significant growth so far. But from vision perspective, I think what we aim to do as a company is to basically grow the on-chain gross domestic product, basically, which means that the more we trade goods and services, the more the economy grows. And being able to do that trading on chain is very valuable, especially if you can use settlement instruments like DAI and Go, for example, for payments. So I do think payments is an interesting use case. The hard part is kind of like how we bridge the gap actually where, you can start using stable coins in, shops and physical locations. And the reason I'm thinking this way is that, I was, kind of born on internet. So it was a big thing for me to, access to all information globally. So you're not limited to your library, your home, what your friends are saying and, teachers teaching you, but you have access to this enormous amount of information, right? But the second thing that was really, really cool is that you could start doing business online, right? And that's something that really put the economy over the internet. So, that's where the PayPals of the world, Stripes of the world were born because, people started to trade online and they needed a settlement system as well. So I think something similar might happen on chain as well. And that's the growth where the growth actually comes. And naturally, it's easier to sell digital goods. That's pretty much what people are doing when they're buying digital assets or they're buying NFTs, for example. So yeah, I do think it plays a vital role, payments.
Maybe coming back to you, Rune, let's talk about the end game. What's your new design focus and the strategy shift? Let's have everybody understand what the plan is and why.
Oh yeah, I'll just do a quick 20-second recap. No, so I mean, I was talking about, right? So actually, let me correct you, Rune. You said we were 6 years old, and that's brand new. 6 years. We are like going past 8 at this point. I mean, we've been grinding in the trenches and smashing our heads against the walls.
I may have counted the multi-collateral.
Oh yeah, okay, then you're right. Well, there was even more craziness before we even launched anything. That was like the most chaotic part of all. Anyway, but Maker is really, really, really old in crypto terms, and we have gone through a lot of craziness over our life and sort of seen and experienced many different cycles of crypto. But mostly throughout this whole time, the sort of the original core vision of what Maker was doing was, we're going to make a stablecoin. The goal is to make blockchain available to normal people. And the way we're going to achieve this is we're going to build some really good tech and then we're going to deploy it. And then, the free market will take care of it, I guess was sort of the idea, right? So we did all that. And it turns out the free market is not that simple, basically. It doesn't just take care of it. And what we basically ran into was that there's this whole dimension of, well, like I didn't even mention the users as I was saying this, right? I mean, who's going to use this stuff, right? How are we going to get them to use it? That's sort of one part of it. And that's the most important part, by far the most important part. But there's also the whole thing of like, how the hell are you going to govern this thing, given that it's a bunch of humans that are going to govern? And the humans, they, like politics, and they like getting rich quick, and they like infighting and so on, as we all know if we've been in crypto long enough, and especially in DAOs. So Endgame is effectively sort of the moment where we fully realize, look, we have to actually like rethink from scratch how exactly are we going to achieve this fundamental vision and goal of building a stablecoin and building something that's going to benefit regular people through all the power available with blockchain technology. And then we sort of, killed the darlings of the project in a sense, right? So rethought it from scratch, and we're like, okay, now we can go from being the oldest and most sort of entrenched and conservative to actually get all the way to like the absolute cutting edge of what's already shown to be possible, and not what we can sort of do of putting together these new ideas, right? And so the absolute number one key killer feature of Endgame is, taking what I'll call like the magic of DeFi summer, which was yield farming, and then removing the crappy part, which was the fact that it was all a bunch of Ponzi and scams and all fell apart, right? But keeping like this idea of you can have fun, it's exciting to get tokens that are sort of have different unique aspects to them, right? It's really interesting to have a new community emerge out of nothing. But not only that, it creates real value. At least if you manage to sort of anchor that value, right? You manage to provide a sort of an actual functional vessel to the passion and the alignment of such a community.
What basically backs those shitcoins, in your opinion?
Yeah. So basically that is what I was just talking about here is like, this is how we are gonna get growth, right? This is how we're gonna provide something that's gonna get users in. But the other problem we have is how we're gonna organize the DAO itself, and that's basically the other part. That's the answer to what backs all these tokens, right? Is that we're going to take Maker and break it up into these subDAOs, as they're called, right? So you take all the different specializations that exist today in sort of one big monolithic kind of soup of Maker today. I mean, it's gotten a lot better. It's the best, most well-run DAO out there, but it's still not anywhere as good as it should be and as it can be. And how we want to make that happen is with these specialized subDAOs, right? So you go from a monolithic approach where everyone has to understand everything and be a part of everything, and you can have more specialized, smaller communities. Some communities can focus on real assets. Some can focus on, deep, cutting-edge innovation. There is Sakura DAO, which is this Japan-themed, culturally focused gaming subDAO, which is very experimental. But the idea is that there also needs to be room for that kind of stuff, basically, in a DAO and in a stablecoin project.
So how do you align all the incentives between the Maker holders and all these other? Because like the one of the issues I see with the subDAO model is that you have the Maker community, and it's relatively stable, the token itself, and you govern the Maker protocol. But once you start having all these subDAOs, it's going to be interesting to see how they all will align interests, for example, with Maker. Like, or is that the even idea there? Because I could imagine that if there's a project that has their own token, maybe, and it's permissionless participation, maybe they will contribute also to the Aave DAO and Aave ecosystem. What is your thinking there?
Yeah, and this is a really interesting point, because this is what's funny is this idea of subDAOs and this idea of like breaking off and having more isolated decision-making power, with the key aspect being that there is capital at stake, right? So subDAOs, they can, for instance, deploy capital on behalf of Maker if they take the first loss, right? So, I mean, and this is actually an example of how you align incentives, right? This is the basic concept of over-collateralization or junior capital, right? I mean, just like we align incentives of borrowers in our lending protocols by telling, yeah, you need to put up some extra capital. So we're not going to lose our money because they put even more money up that they would lose in that case, right? But I mean, and as I said, a lot of people had this idea. Even the very beginning, it was one of the first ideas that people kept repeating in the maker community. And I actually thought it was impossible for the kind of the concerns you're outlining, right? That, look, if you got two different tokens or two different whatever, how are they not gonna fight? And you know, how is it not gonna be a bunch of issues with that? But essentially, our solution is, I mean, first of all, I think we saw that you can just do a lot more with tokens than you just think. We saw that in DeFi somewhere, right? You can do this very advanced, very sophisticated
Financial engineering.
tokenomics and financial engineering, right? So actually, I would describe the very simple relationship in terms of how do you align the subDAO tokens with the MKR token. It's kind of equivalent to, a government and companies where you have basically subsidies and then taxes. So Maker is continuously providing a subsidy to the subDAOs. So they benefit from Maker's growth. And then at the same time, Maker is continuously taxing the subDAOs. So Maker benefits from their growth. And then what you're doing is you're sort of tying the tokens together. So they're in some sense a little bit like a wrapped version of the other. Not completely, right? But there's some element of these tokens actually fundamentally tied together. And then finally, you do have to have a sense of essentially sovereignty in the sense that ultimately all of the subDAOs governance is sort of tied into the governance security of Maker itself. So Maker is able to enforce that a subDAO can't go rogue and sort of break the rules. And of course, what does that mean? What does it mean break the rules? And then we get into the really deep end of Endgame, right? Which involves you got to actually truly gather all the relevant data that is necessary to practically run a giant multi-billion-dollar financial network, and you have to make that data public. You have to make it accessible to the people who are supposed to participate. And we plan to do this with AI because we think that's a really strong tool to make complex data simple. But if you have that, then you can actually, regulate consistently how individual autonomous subDAOs and actors, how they can actually have the freedom to innovate and to experiment, and also collaborate as much as possible. The more the better for us, right? With other projects, right? Because of that fundamental tie-in of the incentives between the subDAO token and the MKR token, Maker doesn't even it's not even necessary that DAI becomes super successful. If the subDAOs are simply successful, then naturally Maker will still be better off. So that's I think that's a really interesting also twist to how Maker is going to sort of act in the space and in the economy, because the goal would just be make sure the subDAOs grow no matter the cost. Doesn't matter who they work with, what stablecoins they promote, anything like that. That's completely fine. If they're making money, the ecosystem as a whole is benefiting.
What stops them leaving the Maker system? Because I kind of feel that if you're an innovator and you want to build something, you could just launch a token by yourself. Yeah, and I get the idea of kind of the junior and senior debt. But for example, what keeps them loyal in Maker?
Well, so that's actually a really cool question, right? But so I really want to stress that, in my opinion, the most important thing to understand about DAO is that the DAO itself is not people, right? The DAO itself is code and tokens. As long as those who hold the tokens are sort of opaque enough that you can't pinpoint the very specific people. As soon as you got identifiable people and these are the whatever it is, it's no longer a DAO, it's some kind of legal association, right? That there's an organized group of known people that are engaging in some sort of economic activity. Sooner or later, at some scale and at some time frame, their interests are going to diverge from those of the DAO and the tokens, which doesn't have any kind of real legal significance, right? So anyway, my point is that there are companies that work for subDAOs, then there are subDAOs themselves, and then there's Maker, and all of these are separate from each other. And when it comes to the companies themselves and ecosystem, right? So Maker today doesn't have a foundation anymore. Famously, it dissolved, right? Today, what Maker has is something like 20 companies that all collaborate, but they don't just work for Maker and work on the subDAOs. Many of them work for, many of the other large protocols in the space.
So maybe just in terms of understanding this as an analogy, you are not saying this is like a subsidiary model where a major company is effectively spinning up these subsidiaries. They're just, in a way, agreeing to work together, but they can have their independent interests. The goal is to have an incentive where they do not kind of diverge too much.
So the companies are fully separate, right? I mean, a company is a company. You can't control a company through the blockchain. SubDAOs are inherently, in a sense, a part of Maker, you could say. So they don't have the technical or the governance capability to separate themselves out of Maker at all. But they simply have a lot of, within those constraints, they have as much autonomy and as much sort of flexibility as it is safe to give them without having sort of, various bad interests occur. Yeah.
This is maybe, I guess, the obvious question for you, Stani, is it seems like you differ on some places. So how do you think about the governance for Go and sort of where do you kind of see that evolve or change from what Rune just said?
Yeah, it's very interesting, Rune. And I think I'm personally more like governance minimalist. So I kind of understand the pain points that come with the governance and what the subDAOs are aiming to solve. I think a lot of the politics actually slows down the innovation and things that could be built better. So I do think that going forward, something that we're researching quite a lot within our team is that where we can actually apply on governance. It's a little bit trickier for protocols like Aave because you have these different kinds of risk parameters that needs to be managed down the line. It's more easier to something like Uniswap where you deploy the code and it has very simple function to do. But nevertheless, I do think that governance is an amazing tool to basically coordinate globally in a very transparent way with integrity. But at the same time, it can really become a bottleneck. And, you see a lot of folks coming into these governance forums and then they, they just cause a lot of pain as well. So it's not a unknown thing in the ecosystem. But I do think that having a DAO or governance structure, which is very narrow, is very important because a DAO isn't a company, right? So effectively, what a DAO is, it allocates treasury, pays bills, and also does code upgrades. So I do think we come from a perspective where in Aave DAO you have these service providers ranging from development work, risk management and other kinds of service providers, and they're hired directly by the DAO. And I think that's been a super efficient model. That's why we've been able to launch Go and do a lot of things on that side and launch all these different markets because there's just people who are incentivized and companies that are incentivized to actually provide the best services to the DAO. And if they don't, we basically fire them. So it's a really interesting model. I don't know if it will be something that we will continue using in the future, but so far it's been working to some success. Yeah.
So I feel like there's some definitional overlap or I guess non-overlap here. Rune, you mentioned that governance to you is just kind of code and a set of rules, whereas a lot of the times in this space, we get governance mixed up with kind of individuals sort of being the bottlenecks to make decisions. I can understand both your points. My kind of question is, for the success of an algorithmic stablecoin, who is responsible for ensuring that it's actually stable and kind of the stability around, in a way, just whatever the pegging is it $1 to USD or any other currency we choose? Is that the code? Is that all of the other parties? Is that now in your case subDAOs working towards managing risk independently? How does that world work in both of your ecosystems? And kind of for you, as you kind of get to scale, you're going to have a lot more volatility until you get there. Where does governance fit in for managing stability?
So the answer is that it's a combination of everything end to end, right? It is the code plus the people plus the rules plus the companies plus the community plus the market and so on and so on and so on, right? And the challenge is, how do you make sure that all of these different pieces, they all align towards that intended goal, given that their individual goals are usually something like, I want to make as much money as possible, especially, I mean, and this is the definition of crypto economics, right? Especially when many of these actors are anonymous. And so, I mean, this is the unfortunate sort of billion-dollar question with governance, which is that you simply can't, or rather you have to assume, if you're trying to build something that's actually resilient, that will run by itself, that you can leave behind, right, and will just keep running, you have to assume that anything controlled by humans could be controlled by corrupt humans, right? Just like you expect any exploit you put in a smart contract to potentially be attacked by North Korea, right? The problem is just that it's a lot harder to model out how can corrupt or incompetent or all the kind of things that humans can do, right? Emotional, whatever, pissed off humans, like all the ways.
Attacks.
Yeah, all the ways that they can cause problems in like a complex sort of multi-dimensional social and technical and economic structure. This is crazy difficult. This is, you can't do like formal verification and then just
there's no rule book here. You can't model human behavior that precisely. So absolutely.
Yeah. But I think that unfortunately, maybe you could also say fortunately, I think basically you got to tackle this problem head on, and like anything else is just gonna fail whenever unless you live forever and you stay in control forever and make sure the good people always running the show, then sooner or later it's going to fail. So that's where we come back to this approach of basically gathering as much data as possible about all the different possibilities within governance, all the different dynamics that can occur, especially between the various humans, the various you could say bureaucrats, as I like to call them sometimes, right? And how you can ensure that there's enough checks and balances that even if you get a sort of an aberration, right, you get some kind of social attack or any kind of like sort of complex issue in governance that's causing drama or politics or whatever, that there's basically enough self-healing ability and kind of immune system built into all of these different aspects of the technical and social and economic and all of those layers, that it can sort of push itself back into equilibrium. And this fundamental idea that this is how you have to build a DAO end to end to serve this goal of resilience is what we call alignment engineering. So you sort of engineer alignment between all the actors towards this goal of sort of protecting themselves against the ways things can go out of equilibrium and out of alignment, and help everyone get it back into alignment. And one of the key aspects, again, is it's got to be easy. It's got to be something everyone can do, because everyone has to be a part of it, and you can't rely on experts or somebody who studied it for 20 years.
That's the circular problem you're trying to solve.
Yeah, because, again, they could be the ones who are the bad guys, right? So, yeah.
I also think that the trusting too much smart contracts is also quite dangerous, because, the Aave protocol, there's probably 3 people that really know the protocol well from a technical standpoint, and it's really hard to build DeFi protocols with some sort of a over-collateralization mechanism, and it becomes quite quickly very, very complex. So I do think that the governance has really big attack surface, and I also think that things we have codified, whether it's smart contracts or it's in law. Times change, and we should be able to change the code as well. So it's I do agree, like people can be they can be the enabler or the destroyer, and how to kind of like keep the right balance in and keep right values is an interesting question, because I think, Rune, you came back to the Maker ecosystem I think a couple of times already. So it just showcases kind of that people who build these protocols and ecosystems, how actually there's a good continuity and the decentralization moves forward. So, and at the same time, you don't want to codify some of the things in a way that you can't actually do any changes, because at that point,
you're blocking yourself from growing.
Exactly. Imagine using, who is using here over 10-year-old laptop, for example? No one, right? So okay, one. But it's an example that software, hardware, it gets dated effectively. So whenever you ship software, the expiry date is when you ship it. So if you want to keep and innovate, you have to have a mechanism to actually upgrade things. But I think there needs to be a combination. In somewhere you want to have upgradability, and somewhere you want to have immutability. So nothing can change, and that's also a very beautiful thing.
So one kind of thing I'm curious about, kind of having heard all of this, is, do you as Go and you as DAI see the protocol, or see it as a protocol or a product? What effectively are you designing, and is this a developer tool or a consumer tool? It's got to be a mix of both, but prioritization-wise, how do you define these things?
Yeah, that's a great question. You sort of answered it in that you gotta have both to some extent. And actually, I think for Maker, we used to probably think of it as purely as a protocol. And we made a bunch of weird decisions in hindsight, such as having a very low supply of MKR, entirely for this goal. Look, this is a back-end thing. This is supposed to, this is not for you unless you're a genius and you can sit and manage a central bank or something, right? And that's the kind of vibe that we built up in the community. And the problem is that's just not how crypto works, what makes crypto grow, right? Crypto is very much you gotta be able to, you gotta have that access, you gotta have that community spirit, right? You gotta have that excitement. So that's a huge part of what we are changing with Endgame in Maker, the final attempt to actually make it run itself and make it sustainable and make it able to grow sustainably, right? That is to really be let's make it a lot more like a product that still stays true to that fundamental idea that, of course, it is infrastructure and it is a protocol. Immediately in the short run, so in a couple of months, the way that everyone will be impacted by this is that Maker is actually doing a rebrand, which some of you probably don't know yet, but you'll find out soon.
Are you gonna change to Taker?
No, it will.
And where does Solana come into this thing?
It will. So many brands, and especially Maker, as probably one of the first and oldest surviving brands, right? We're just made up sounds cool, right? There wasn't really much thought put into what is a brand? What's the purpose of a brand? What's the purpose of the project? Usually, very often that is not really aligned with sort of the broader vision and product goal, right? So now by again sort of killing our darlings, right? By going back to first principles and everything, and how to really achieve lasting success and growth and a niche that actually makes sense for what a decentralized stablecoin can do. We've been in this very long, deep process, hiring some top brand development firms to basically try to develop an end-to-end brand that fits with the strategy, that fits with this fundamental concept actually of alignment engineering, right? That itself ties into how do you tie it all together. But I think, again, back to what I was saying in the beginning, most importantly, how do you get the goddamn user, right? How do you speak to normal users who aren't crypto bros? Because we already got those in the super nerdy techie types. I mean, they're already in crypto, right?
They're curious enough to already be at the edge, but that's not the audience you want to get to for mass adoption.
Yeah, I mean, it's a cliche, right? But we gotta go beyond crypto, right? We gotta get to normal people, and I mean, and they're not into stuff like decentralization or libertarianism anymore. We already got those guys, right? We need something simpler that you don't have to like, become a fanboy and sort of go all in to use, right? So that's the idea with the rebrand.
I also think that there's a great distinction between a community and actual users. You might make some product decisions that actually has some sort of response from users and the community, and I think we get these two groups very easily mixed up in our space. And regarding I also think we put a lot of emphasis on the kind of like a word of a protocol, because at the end of the day if they have end users, they're decentralized products more or less, whether it's like a consumer user or maybe like a business user. That's how we think in our company. So we just basically focus on building for the user, trying to understand what they're doing day to day, and building features around their behavior, and trying to understand as well that what could save their time, what could be better experience, and I think that's kind of like what's really missing in crypto. So we focus on building these massive communities who are very loud, and at the same time there's no users necessarily. So we're focusing on quite a lot of actually building end-to-end good products. We're known for building good backend infrastructure, smart contract infrastructure, and we're more and more focusing on building better experiences as well, and getting the best UX talent as well, and designers, and I think down the line we do also a lot of branding work internally. We're very proud of the brands we create, and the way we use our brands is we always want to tell some sort of story as well. So I think I like to always say that we're kind of in a moment where we're trying to figure out the personal computer interface for the blockchain, and we're now kind of like getting to that. So how you abstract away a lot of the complexity and abstract away the blockchain and create interfaces where they're seamless and something that normies can actually use. So it's a really, really fascinating time now to build actually DeFi.
Awesome. We may have time for 2 questions. If there's anybody in the audience who has questions, just walk up over to the stand right now. Otherwise, I'm going to finish with my list. But we're nearing the end. So as we get a couple more people in, my question, a quick one for you, Stani, would be early days for Go. Are you satisfied with where things are now? Kind of how do you assess how the last couple of months have been?
Yeah, I mean, our team builds software, so we're happy that we launched Go. It's been something we've been working for over a year, and obviously, the Aave DAO is more responsible of what will be the growth paths for Go as well. I'm pretty happy that's where it's been growing, especially because there's no native incentive, so the growth has been quite organic. And I've seen some fascinating initiatives. We did this Go passport, for example, where we sold Go passports for 100 Go, where you get basically a Aave ticket, some swag, and the NFT itself. And we sold 300 of those. So I just want to see more and more kind of like creativity. So if some of you are hacking this weekend, that's an interesting area to try to focus and bringing creativity out, how you could use, for example, Go.
Awesome. Well, my last question to you before we go into the audience question is, starting with Rune, what advice would you give to Stani as he scales up Grow? And then I want Stani to do the same for Rune.
Yeah, I'll repeat what I've already said, which is it's all about focusing on the user, growing demand, And I think Go had this issue with the peg that I think is now going to get solved because of the supply ceiling getting hit. And I really think that it's going to be that's an opportunity to then, from then on, keeping the peg exactly at 1, which will have this kind of additional effect of actually getting even more demand, because obviously that's just a major signal for end users. So I'm very excited to see that and then see how it can grow from there.
Well, my first advice will be to drop the endgame, but Rune will not listen to me. So obviously, I'm joking, because it's really interesting experimentation in DeFi. But regarding the subDAOs, I see a lot of the Maker community forking different protocols. And my kind of worry there is that, some of these teams, they might not know the code base significantly. And it's very hard, for example, to ensure the security of the protocol itself. And I think a lot of emphasis should go there. And I've seen some ImmuneFi bug bounties, which has been quite great. But I think that's the kind of like the flip side of those subDAOs, because they're using infrastructure that they necessarily haven't built, and complex infrastructure. So I think there's something very simple like the Uniswap protocol, and it's relatively simple to understand how it works. But when you go to the liquidity protocols, it becomes more complex and with different setups. So my kind of advice will be there to put more focus on that side.
Yeah, we definitely want to do that, and we want to collaborate with you guys, work together on security. Absolutely.
That's an awesome ending. All right, 2 people, or is there a third? Just 2 people. So we'll just do 2 questions. Please make them concise and no multi-part questions. That's the time we have. So please.
Good morning. A quick question. Do you see seigniorage share stablecoins ever flourishing in the future?
It's a little bit louder.
Do you see any seigniorage share stablecoins, algo stablecoins that are non-collateralized, to exist and flourish in the future?
I think we may have some AV issues here. We're not, you may have to shout because the echo, I think, is yeah.
I'm going to try again. Is there any future that you can see seigniorage share stablecoins exist and flourish?
Now I get it. Yeah, absolutely not. No, it's that concept was immediately proven unworkable theoretically the moment it was proposed, and no one else ever did it because it was so obvious it didn't work. And then every time someone tried it, it failed every single time. So you can't create something out of nothing. That is almost physics.
We've seen 6 years of seigniorage shares not work out well. Second question. Sorry.
So at the beginning of the panel, you mentioned about Tether's success, and I think a part of the success was due to Bitfinex, introducing it. Then Tether being largely used for market making and for crypto liquidity. And I also see similar moves being made by Binance, etc. Because, like you mentioned, user demand being extremely critical to Maker success. For instance, and when you were talking about subDAOs, there was this nostalgia about DeFi summer, and looking at Spark protocol right now. I'm a user of Spark, farming using SDAI, and I see that we are perhaps and I'm just gonna preface this, then ask my question. Maker might still be too DeFi centric. Looking at users, we have right now 5 million on-chain active users versus roughly 60 million centralized exchange users. And and this is going to be my question. Are you guys looking at, for instance, SDAI being utilized in, let's say, on-chain order book liquidity or centralized exchange liquidity? Are you guys looking at fintech integrations like payments, microcredit, stuff that could, get a lot of traction, basically, in terms of user demand?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So the challenge with Maker has always been there's a trillion opportunities. How do you prioritize? How do you execute? And this subDAO approach is supposed to be the solution to that, right? Because we have SparkDAO, Spark Protocol. That's for cutting edge DeFi. That's for collaborating with Aave and other of the sort of the deep crypto projects, for things like doing stuff on centralized exchanges, doing stuff in TradFi, interesting partnerships, interesting experiments. We've done that with the core of Maker, but it's been very slow, and it's just, again, it's difficult to do that with a giant monolithic governance process. So we have multiple different real asset focused subDAOs that focus on different aspects of this, right? There's public credit, scale, institutions. Then there's like private credit, getting sort of in the weeds, funding small businesses. It's so much easier to do that through a decentralized process if the community making the sort of the fundamental decisions is specialized in that field, right? And that's what the subDAOs do. Everyone can farm the tokens. If you're into private credit and you want to fund small businesses in Indonesia, there's a subDAO for that, right? If you're into cutting edge tech, doing the latest DeFi, collaborating with all the other big protocols, then you farm Spark Protocol. And that way, the community itself, the votings itself will be a lot more competent, hopefully.
Awesome. Well, please join me in thanking Rune and Stani for this amazing conversation.
Thank you.